ask you first. Okay. So if you would introduce yourself and tell us a bit about how you got to where you are now and what you're doing research on and what your path was as you got here.
Sure. I'm Mike Beran, and I am a professor in the Department of Psychology, and I'm also co-director of the Language Research Center here at Georgia State, and I'm in the cognitive sciences area, and I'm very happily a cognitive psychologist, but for the very early part of my career, I had no idea what I wanted to be. So I went to college at Oglethorpe University, which is here in Atlanta. It's the castle-y looking buildings just down the street, actually on Peachtree Industrial, that you might have seen before and wondered about that. It's a pretty small school, and that's what I was looking for. So when I was in high school, I went to a high school of about 900 students, and I wanted to go to a college that wasn't a whole lot bigger than that. And I didn't know what I wanted to be. So no one in my immediate family had been to college, and only a couple of people in my extended family had been to college. So college was a very new thing for the Beran family. And so, I went to college thinking that I wanted to get a job where I would make money. And I also wanted to take classes that I really didn't have the chance to take in high school. So I went to a Catholic high school, and it was a great school, but I didn't take a whole lot of philosophy or psychology. In fact, I didn't really know what psychology was until I got to Oglethorpe. And so I started Oglethorpe as an accounting major because I figured I would count money and make money, and that seemed like a pretty easy way to go. And I learned after about a year that although counting money was a pretty easy thing to do, I didn't want to count other people's money my whole life. So I got pretty bored with that. And so then I thought, well, how about if I just major in business, and then I'll have a big company and I'll have the money and somebody else can count it. And then I took business classes, and that was awful. Business classes to me were terrible. I couldn't figure out what professors were even talking about. It didn't spark any interest. And so I spent the first part of my sophomore year really not having a major. I think I was probably still listed as a business major. And then halfway through my sophomore year, I became a political studies major. And I had one professor in particular who I really liked taking classes with, who was very tough and really challenged us to think about things that were going on in the world. And sort of by way of telling you how old I am, this was right at the point at which the Soviet Union was collapsing. So it was a really cool time to be studying international politics and thinking about what the future of this new sort of independent Russia and newly independent former Soviet states would be like in terms of their relation with, a newly reunited Germany, and of course, a U.S. that was still basically involved in the Cold War with the former Soviet Union. So I spent a lot of time reading and writing about those things, and I love that. And I intended probably to go to law school and then work in a think tank, maybe work in Washington, D.C. And of course, I considered taking basket weaving and all of those other really challenging classes, but I decided for what I was paying in tuition, I should take some interesting classes and put together a minor. And I had taken a drugs and behavior class in the psych department, and I really liked that. So I said, I'll take some more of the psychology stuff. And I happened to hit in the same sort of back-to-back semesters, I hit on cognitive psychology and animal learning. And I then went to my political studies advisor and said, I'm a first semester senior, but this is the wrong major for me. And after about an hour and a half long conversation in which he was not happy with my decision to change majors, I came out of there being a psych major and a poli-sci minor. And I immediately went to my two co-mentors at Oglethorpe, one of whom was a cognitive psychologist and one of whom did drug work with animals over at the Yerkes Primate Center, and started talking to them about graduate school. And although you might think that finally got me on my right path, it didn't, because I only applied in my senior year to psychopharmacology programs. And so I was going to study the effects of drugs on animal behavior. And I took trips to that part of the country here in the Southeast where they do a lot of work on tobacco and nicotine and its effects on animals. And I realized pretty quickly that I didn't want to do that kind of animal research. And instead, I was far more interested in what animals might be thinking rather than what they might be smoking or drinking. So I pretty quickly found my way back into sort of that idea that is now really, really well known, but back in those days was unheard of, which was the gap year. And I tried to explain to my parents that I was going to use my education to do nothing for a year and then figure out how to go get more education. And I really couldn't convince them of that. But what happened, and this is probably the luckiest thing that's happened to me in my academic career, is that at the time, Georgia State University was on a rolling quarter system. So you could just apply at any point in the year and get into the graduate program here at GSU. And so I actually applied to come to GSU in April of my senior year, just a few weeks before I graduated. And a few weeks after I graduated, Dwayne Wumbaugh called me and said, I'd love to have you come out to the Language Research Center and talk to us about our grad program. And so I went out and I met Dwayne and Sue Savage Rumbaugh and the other people that were working there at the LRC. At the time, Marianne was working there, and Rose Sevchek was working there, and David Washburn was working there, and Robin Morris had recently been working there. And so I went and visited, and I got accepted into the program, and I started just a couple months after that. So it was a really weird process, and it's one that I'm thankful for now because I had the chance to study lots of other things. So now when I have to balance the books, I can do that. And now when I have to think about stock investments, I know how to look at it, an investment form and decide whether it's a good investment or not. I'm glad I'm not doing any of that, but I learned really interesting things during my undergrad. And so, that's how I got here. And I was actually for a long time working at the LRC and supporting myself in part off of grants and off of a little bit of teaching here and there. I taught at Spelman College for almost 5 years. And then I joined the psych faculty in 2015. For a number of reasons, because I was collaborating with everybody, but because I also wanted to start to take on my own doctoral students and do that. And, just to end my story, 14 months ago, I was happily an associate professor who was working at the LRC and teaching my classes. And then David Washburn, who was the LRC director, decided to retire on 3 days' notice. And so I became co-director of the LRC. And just as I got used to that and thought, wow, that's plenty of administrative work, I was asked to become associate chair during this little pandemic, this tiny little pandemic that we're going through, and I agreed to do that. So it's been a long and winding road.
That is marvelous. What a wonderful, wonderful story. So what do you think how would you say your biggest challenge was, besides a certain level of indecisiveness, perhaps? What would you say is your biggest challenge?
It's for me in graduate school, I never thought I would stay. So I did my graduate work here at Georgia State, and I've been here ever since. And so, there are lots of things that I shouldn't offer advice on, but at the top of that list is how to get a postdoc, because I just have no idea how to get a postdoc, because I never. And so I think the big challenge for me was that I always came here intending to go somewhere else. And so at each point, which I had the opportunity to apply for jobs, and in a couple of cases, I even had offers for jobs at other places, I had to think really hard about the degree to which the security of those jobs without access to sort of my core research resource, which is non-human primate that I can work with. I had to kind of balance those two things. And each time I made that decision, it really was a tricky one, because it was the job security of a tenure track position somewhere versus sort of trying to stay on early in my career and hoping that I could keep getting grant support and hoping that I could still find enough teaching work to make a reasonable salary. So, those were always the most difficult times.
Mm-hmm. And what was something that you'd say kept you going, like in your graduate school or your early career, something that sort of inspired you and made you feel like you're doing things right?
So I think my favorite thing, and I say this just because I'm pretty sure it's the first picture I still have on my website, was that I got invited to give a talk as the keynote speaker to an undergrad conference in Southeast Missouri. And so it involved driving myself to Missouri and like spending the night there and going out with graduate students and really doing all of those kinds of things that when I was a grad student, I was going and hanging out with the invited speaker or whatever and going to dinner. And what was really neat was when I got to campus, they have a wall right outside of the little pavilion where they have their speakers come in and they paint murals to advertise. And so there was a mural there of a monkey with M&Ms, because I was going to talk about self-control and delay of gratification in human primates. And the quote on it was something like, if you were a monkey, how long would you wait for an M&M? And then, of course, underneath it, come see at 5 o'clock, Dr. Mike talked about self-control and non-human primates. And I had a student, a random stranger walk by, and I was like, will you please take a picture of me in front of this? Because, that's me giving that talk. And it was just I get a fanboying over my own mural there. Someone painted a mural about what I do, and who would have thought that would ever happen? So
that is so cool.
The tinglies, the warm fuzzies. I still get the warm fuzzies from that.
That is marvelous. So what do you wish someone had told you about graduate school? What do you wish you had known that you didn't know going into it?
I think probably the thing that would have been most important was to explain that it's not like undergrad, that the coursework and the research are very, very different. So you do your coursework, but that's not a focus anymore. When I was an undergrad, I had a lot of fun and I skipped classes and I did lots of things, but I always knew I had to make the grades. And so the goal was make the grades. And if you're doing that, then everything else is sort of secondary to that, playing intramurals and doing things like that and having fun with friends. And I think had someone told me early on in graduate school, pay more attention to what's going on around you. Like think about the teaching styles of the professors that are doing a really good job, so you can start to imagine yourself in the classroom using those skills. So I wish I had sort of paid more attention to the things that weren't about focusing so much on my academics in my first or second year. And because I came in and wanted to make the straight A's, and of course also wanted to be working in the lab. But I think I would try to encourage people now to say, look at what goes on sort of outside the classroom and outside of your direct lab work, like what it is about being in academia, and then think about how well that fits your personality and what kind of skills you don't have that you need to develop to be pretty good there. Yeah. So people tease me all the time and they're like, they don't believe this, but I'm kind of a naturally antisocial person. I mean, I like being around people, but it's kind of work to be around people for me. And so in academia, of course, conferences were a really big thing for me at the beginning because it was a lot of people and it was long days. And so that was another thing I really had to kind of work to get used to and comfortable doing is like conferencing all day long.
Mm-hmm. What, tell us about, you've listed a lot of people who sort of helped you out and gave you advice. Who would you think is someone who is really helpful to you? What's a story of someone who was helpful to you along the way?
Yeah, so I'll tell a personal story. So Dwayne Rumbaugh was my mentor and my advisor, and in my second year of graduate school, my father had a massive heart attack and died, and it was unexpected. Didn't know he was sick, and my mom was sort of in a real bad way after that, and so I went home that summer after my dad died, and I went to Dwayne and I said, I need to go home for the summer and take care of my mom, and of course he said that's fine. And about halfway through the summer, I really wasn't doing so great. She wasn't doing so great. And so I basically wrote Dwayne a letter and said, I'm going to withdraw from the program. And he called me on the phone. He said, you're not withdrawing. You're staying in the program. You come back when you're ready to come back. And he said, well, you can work remotely. We can write together. And you're not taking classes this semester anyhow. So everything would be fine. And so that was the first chance I had to see that somebody looked at me as other than just the student to take care of things in the lab or to produce publications, and he was sort of investing in my future. And of course, I was really lucky that David Washburn later, after Dwayne retired, took me on as a student. And I always tell people that although it's probably not in any form anywhere, not even the little blue coupons we used to fill out 25 years ago when you were in the department, Jim Pate was also a mentor to mine. Jim helped teach me how to write, but also on many occasions just was very supportive in things that he said to me, especially at conferences about presentations back when I was still feeling very nervous about doing that kind of stuff.
Marvelous. Yeah, it really takes a lot of people to get us to this point, doesn't it? A lot of effort. So something we're trying to collect from everybody, of course, is, the word or the concept you ran into in grad school where it seemed like everybody else understood what they were talking about and you're not quite sure what's going on. Did you have an experience like that?
Yes. So we'll go back to Jim Pate again. I think I spent the entire semester taking statistics with him, trying to remember or look up or remind myself while I kept my head down as to what orthogonal meant. Orthogonal was that word for me. And so even if you ask me now, even though I do know the meaning for that, I'll still take the fifth and just be like, I don't want to answer that one out loud. So yes, that was definitely on my list.
Orthogonal. All right. Good to know. Good to know.
So that's going to go out. Everybody's going to see this, and that's all I'm going to hear for the next 2 years.
Dr. Orthogonal. We've all got it. We've all got it. Well, that was the whole interview. So thank you so much.
Sure, my pleasure.
For that. Yeah.
Thanks.